Well, good afternoon, cannabis industry members in Oklahoma and affiliates. I'm Bud Scott, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Cannabis Industry Association, bringing you an update today with some advice about coronavirus and how to behave and how to operate your business during this time of trial. And I'm joined today by Chris Cotner of Cotner Law Firm, who is an OCIA member and a dedicated servant to the community as well.
Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. Really wanted to first go over the state of cannabis operations in Oklahoma under both the federal order and the state orders. And right now, cannabis medical marijuana dispensaries have been designated, and this is by executive order from the governor of Oklahoma, as an essential service, meaning that they are to be allowed to stay open to service all these patients, just like your pharmacies, your hospitals. They are not considered a retail service, but a healthcare service. So what we would really do is encourage those of you that stay in operation to just comply with the guidelines that we've seen at the federal level. Make sure that all your employees are taking appropriate safeguards, washing their hands, encouraging those of you that decide to offer curbside service or takeout service to limit the amount of customers that are coming into your facility until this thing burns out. Chris, do you have any additions on that?
I was going to say, it's not just dispensaries. It's anybody in the supply chain for medical marijuana businesses. So for the first time in, I don't know, Oklahoma history at least, maybe not federal history, but at least for the first time in Oklahoma history, we have marijuana medically declared to be necessary business.
Yes, sir.
By the governor of the state of Oklahoma and all the supporting businesses that go with that. So I think that's a pretty big deal for the industry.
This is a pretty drastic move. It creates a legal precedence for us to argue that medical marijuana businesses should be treated more like a pharmacy or more like a medical business than, say, a liquor store.
Well, it's interesting you say that the liquor stores are classified under other community-based functions in the governor's executive order, along with grocery stores and some of those other things. So it's actually elevated medical marijuana dispensaries and their supply chains to a level of importance that I don't think we've ever seen before.
Absolutely. Now, I'd like to maybe have you explain to our members here and the affiliates in our community what the potential ramifications of this order declaration would be beyond just allowing us to stay open during this pandemic.
One of my first thoughts is that you will never see a prosecution of a medical marijuana business in Oklahoma by the feds. I think it would almost be impossible at this point. That's not to say that they can't.
Sure.
Let's be clear about that.
Sure.
This is all still illegal under federal law. But the ability to walk into court and say, we're not illegal, and here's why. Here's an executive order issued by the governor of the state of Oklahoma that allowed us to stay open during this time period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Oklahoma's not alone in that, correct?
Oklahoma's not alone in that.
We've seen multiple states across the country and widely varying from ideological spectrums as well, but this has been a pretty consistent application for the cannabis industry, and we've never seen this before nationally.
We have not. And I think it's a testament not only to the people who advocated for it from the get-go, but also to the people who voted for it.
Absolutely.
That this was something that they said, even if they didn't necessarily agree, and I think we can all acknowledge that there are lots of people who voted for 788 who might not agree with it otherwise,
certainly,
but saw that it was necessary because of some of the situations they saw their family members or friends in. So I think this is huge.
I agree. I know that we were discussing offline here some of the other possibilities because this is just such a tremendous step that we're seeing. And one of those in Oklahoma, you have legal location setback requirements that are applied to certain businesses that the government may not deem as being suitable for a location near a school or near a church, primarily the liquor industry.
Right.
So bars, liquor stores, breweries, and this distinction as marijuana businesses being treated under the healthcare guise instead of under the commercial sector is really a pretty big move that should be able to distinguish our businesses which are not a public health threat from those that are deemed to be so.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if the legislature doesn't come back into session, how some of those setback requirements will be dealt with at OMA, because there are some already currently in the law, and we all have to deal with those. But there can be an interesting push to get rid of some of those setback requirements. Yeah.
I know through the Oklahoma Cannabis Industry Association, it's actually been a priority for several years now to address these setback requirements, just because it was included in the original language of 788. However, most communities, the Oklahoma Municipal League is not really a big fan of the setback requirements either. It's something that we've been trying to move on with in the alcohol industry as well. So this ought to have provided some ammunition for a sound public policy development discussion and why we should remove this from our industry.
Yes, I'm all for that.
Absolutely.
Let's go have that. Let's call up the director right now.
I like it. Well,
let's go have that discussion.
Do you have any other quick tidbits or recommendations or advice for our members of the community?
Yes, we spoke a little bit about this, and I'm going to be a little bit passionate because part of my practice is not just cannabis, but I also have a non-cannabis practice, and a lot of that involves what people call estate planning. Other people call, doing wills and trusts or whatever you want to call it. But there's an issue related to the fact that if you don't have a durable power of attorney for at a minimum healthcare in place, then if you were to become incapacitated, or if you have a loved one or a friend who doesn't have this in place, and they were to become incapacitated, whether it's by COVID or anything else, if you don't have a durable power of attorney in place, there's nobody that can talk to a doctor to make medical decisions.
Yes.
And when that happens, they end up on my desk to a certain extent. And we have to go down to the courthouse and get an emergency guardianship put into place. And right now, the courthouse is only open to emergencies.
Yes.
So depending on the level of emergency it might be, I guess there's always a possibility that the local county courts could determine that it's not an emergency. So even if we think it's an emergency guardianship, it's up to the county to determine whether or not we meet those qualifications.
And when you go to the courts, you never really know what the results are going to be.
You don't know what the results are going to be because, families get along and families don't get along.
Yes.
And so if you have a mom who doesn't have something in place and you have siblings that you're in conflict with and your mom becomes incapacitated in some way and you go seek an emergency guardianship, you have to notify all of those people.
Yes.
So not just you showing up to say, I want to be guardian, but now you've got, wayward brother or wayward sister also showing up and saying, hey, no, we want to be guardian, and she or he shouldn't be, but we should be, and then and then nothing happens really, because it becomes a contested matter at that point in time.
Now, we also discussed pairing with that what's called an advance directive or a final directive.
Yes.
And maybe explain that briefly.
Well, the advance directive is related to end-stage conditions. So you have your healthcare power of attorney, which takes you all the way up to a point where a doctor has determined that you have an end-stage condition and you're not going to make it for another 6 months. And at that point in time, that advance directive sets forth the decisions that you want that healthcare proxy, who in some ways is still the same person as in the healthcare power of attorney. Talk about some logistics on that, but the nice thing though is that if you have one of those filled out, my dad always jokes that he put my sister in charge of healthcare decisions and me in charge of finance decisions because he didn't want the same person having the ability to write checks as who can pull the plug.
Sure.
Whether that's accurate, I don't know. But the advance directive, when you have it filled out, it gives direction to whoever it is to say, this was my decision made while I was confident to do so. You're not making any decisions. All you're doing is enforcing the decisions that I wanted made for end of life stuff.
And so right now with the pandemic going on, and this is something well beyond just this period, people should have these in place just to avoid a whole range of issues. But you can actually do these both at the same time.
Yes.
You can have an advance directive, you can have a durable power of attorney.
Yes.
And my list real quick, people can do this, either hire an attorney to handle this, or
if you can afford it, find a legal provider of your choice and pay them to do this for you. At a minimum, if you can't afford it, the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, you have to Google it, like OKDHS, medical power of attorney form. There's a PDF available, and you can print that out at home, fill it out. The hard part's going to be the 2 witnesses over the age of 18 who are not related by blood or marriage and a notary, but you could probably figure that part out.
So in this limited time of open businesses, try a bank. That would be the best spot to do that because they both notarize, and then there would be other witnesses available.
Sure.
So Chris, thank you for joining us to explain some of these issues, and everyone else out there, stay safe, wash your hands, stay at home until this thing burns out, or operate your business in the most safeguarded manner possible, and be careful out there.